I needed a little change of venue. And the reason is because if you've been following along in these episodes, you need to appreciate that we're about to enter kind of a brave new world here. We've spent all of the previous episodes working very, very hard to understand how data gets from one application to another. We've worked on cabling and Ethernet and IP and all of these transport layer, trying to understand the entire process of what moves data from an application in one computer to an application in the other computer. So we're going to be spending the next few episodes getting deep and dirty in the world of applications. CompTIA on the Network Plus wants you to really understand things like HTTP or FTP, email. And that's important, and I agree, because these are where a lot of the problems run into, where we as network techs have to get in there with our screwdrivers, figuratively or literally, and make the fixes. So let's go ahead and get started with probably the granddaddy of them all, HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it is the basis of what we call the World Wide Web. HTTP, as you probably can tell by watching earlier episodes, listens on port 80, and port 80 is unique to HTTP. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to head back into the office here, and let's take a look, starting with probably the more interesting of the two ends of this, let's take a look at a real web server. I've got two computers here in front of me. One of them is a web server, and the other one is a web client. Can you tell by looking? Well, you can't. One of the problems that people run into is when we start saying the word server, we're always visualizing these big boxes that are put into big racks and that they've got tons of RAM and hundreds of terabytes of drive space, but that's not really what a server is. A server is just software, and as long as I'm willing to run on a system that doesn't have quite the same throughput as one of those big rack systems, I can run a web server. Oh, by the way, it's on this one. I can run a web server on any computer. It doesn't really matter. When we talk about web servers, really most of the industry is broken down into two competing versions. There is Microsoft's IIS, Internet Information Service, and the other one is Apache, which is an open source and also extremely popular. Now, I'm going to be using IIS because, well, I'm a Windows guy and Microsoft provides a free copy to me. So well, let's go ahead and move over here and take a look at IIS. Okay, so let's take a look at IIS. Now, the thing I need to make sure you understand is that most server programs don't really have an interface. To actually see the program, I have to scroll through here a little bit. There it is. So here's IIS running. Now, if I want to make any configuration changes or anything like that, there's usually some type of management software I can run. So I'm going to go ahead and fire that up. And now this is the manager for my web server. Yeah. All right. Now, as we take a look at this, we can set up a whole bunch of important stuff here. For example, we can say, where's the initial HTML file that they're going to be looking at? We can set up, you can even set up authentication. Most people aren't aware of that, but if you wanted to, you can set up a web server where it has to log in with a username and password. So you can do a lot of stuff here. Now, once this is up and cooking, now you notice that I can actually restart or stop the actual server itself from this tool. But once it's up and running, we tend to just leave it like this and let it be. There's nothing really that much for us to do. Now, the Network Plus isn't expecting you to become an expert at configuring web servers like IIS or Apache. However, they do expect you to be able to predict certain things. For example, is there a web server running on a particular system? Man, the best way to figure that out is to run a netstat -a and see if it's listening on port 80. You probably have a web server running on that machine if you do. Also, you need to appreciate that you need to be able to get to a web server. So if you've got a web server and people aren't getting to it, you're going to have to take a look at all kinds of different stuff to see as potential problems. What's between you and that server that's keeping you from getting to it? NetPlus's real interest is on the client side. Now, Microsoft is a big contributor to CompTIA, and as a result of that, most of the questions you're going to be seeing on web clients concentrate on Microsoft's Internet Explorer. Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of choices here. Me personally, I'm a Google Chrome man. I like Google Chrome. But there's also Firefox, Safari, there's all kinds of other choices when it comes to web clients. But keep in mind, Network Plus is mainly going to be asking questions about Internet Explorer. So let's go ahead and fire up Internet Explorer and let's check out my website. Now, you'll notice that my web server is not very interesting. It has a default web page, which is just the default IIS. Now, the only thing I really want to hit on here, you're going to be having a lot of questions on NetPlus that talk about web issues, but a lot of them are kind of specific, so we'll be doing this in other episodes. For right now, though, what I want you to be aware of is that Network Plus will often ask pathing questions on how to get to settings in Internet Explorer. And they always say Tools, Internet Options. Now, if you look here on version 10, there is no tools. Well, there really is. If you look right here, this little guy right here is the Tools button. So even though it doesn't say Tools anymore like it did in other versions, it has a little pop-up that says Tools. This is Tools. So the path for almost anything in Internet Explorer is Tools, and here's Internet Options. But for right now, just appreciate Tools, Internet Options will get you where you need to go. So I've got a client over here, and I've got a web server over here. So one of the really cool things about looking at any TCP/IP application is to actually watch and see what it does. So I've got Wireshark running over here on my server, and I'm going to access the web page, and let's watch what happens. Okay, so while I tried to access that web page, I had my capture running. So somewhere in here is the actual web page being captured. Now, luckily for us, we've got lots of filtering. Let me go ahead and stop that capture. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter on HTTP. So now we're only seeing HTTP stuff. Now, right here at the bottom is the actual incoming request. Now, I know the originating computer was 202.13.212.102, and the IP address for my computer is 202.13.212.104. So that's actually my little sneakiness here where I can tell where things are started. So this is where the conversation begins, and this is a GET command, which is very common for HTTP, and it's basically getting the web page. So it gets the web page. Now I want to take a look at this in particular, this GET command. There's some interesting stuff here. Now you'll notice what the host says is 202.13.212.104. What's happened right here is I actually typed in on my client 202.13.212.104. Now, if I had typed in www.mikehasagreatwebpage.com, that would have shown up here. That's really important that you have the host information because one web server could be hosting lots and lots of different websites, and it's this piece of information that allows it to tell which web page it wants. Keep in mind that this host only has one IP address, so if we're getting 5 or 6 different hosted websites on this one computer, it uses that information to keep them separated. So as we go through here, we'll see what it's starting to pull in. So it says, here's a PNG file, so we're getting some graphics in, here's a JPEG, and we're watching the entire page being pulled in, and eventually we get a response saying the page has been sent. And these are OKs for each one of the images as they're coming in. Now what's kind of cool here, and this is something that makes Wireshark a lot of fun, is you can right-click anywhere within this transaction and click on Follow TCP Stream. Now when we do this, what you'll actually get is the real HTML commands as they're being moved back and forth, and it's just put in one big packet. So this is what your computer's actually reading to make that particular web page. All right, is that cool that Wireshark allows you to put together your entire connection like that? If you're not sold on using Wireshark now, I don't know what else I could do. Okay. Anyway, the important thing is that we used our client, and he made a request on port 80 to our server, and we actually got to watch that request come in, and we got to watch the server send the web page to the client. So that's pretty cool. The problem with HTTP is exactly like you saw when we did the follow the TCP stream. Everything's pretty much out in the clear. You can see the entire transaction. So that's bad if we want to do things like online banking or buy books or things like that. So what we have is a version of HTTP called HTTPS. HTTPS, it's still HTTP, but it adds a layer of security, in essence encrypting that TCP stream you just saw so that nosy people can't read it. So let's go through the process again. Now what I've done is on my server side, I've set it up now to be able to support HTTPS. And on my client, all I'm going to do now is I'm going to type in HTTPS whack whack and then the IP address. So it comes over And let's see what Wireshark pulls up this time. Okay, so here's my Wireshark connection. We'll just type in TCP this time. Okay, so I'm going to have to scroll through a little bit to find this. So here's the transaction between 102 and 104. Okay, here it is. So what I want you to see is this is the initial transaction coming in from the client to the server. You'll see that we see the term TLS. HTTPS uses two different protocols, SSL, which is the old school way, and then TLS, which is the new way. And what these are doing is they're actually setting up the encryption to make HTTPS work. So you can see that they're talking to each other and they're beginning to send data. Now the problem is, well, it's not a problem, it's a good part, is that you can't really see any of the data. So if we open this up and take a look at the data, you can see that it's all this encrypted gobbledygook, and that's good. So I'm going to right-click on this and try to follow a TCP stream, and you get this ugly mess. That is encrypted data, and that is the beauty of HTTPS. Now, HTTPS uses either SSL or TLS to make all this encryption, and these are really cool, but they kind of need their own episodes, so you're going to have to keep watching in later episodes, and we're going to cover all this in great detail. But for right now, and for the Network Plus, the big thing I want you to appreciate is that HTTP uses port 80, and HTTPS uses port 443. It's on the exam.